Welcome to Managing a Remote Workforce for Resilience and Results. That seemed a great title when we thought about putting this together, which we did only about 3 days ago, maybe 4 days ago. What we're about to go through is a whole series of information that would love to share with you guys, and really is a fantastic example of how we've worked as a remote team, because we're all disparate and different places around Australia, to actually bring you this session today. If you'd like to move on to the next slide, please, Michelle, that'd be fab. I guess we have to address the sort of elephant in the room question, really, or in our case, the elephant in the classroom. I don't think there's a single person on this call right now who wants to be here or would imagine that they were going to be on a call like this, as recently as January or February. The world, thanks to the coronavirus or COVID-19, has gone through a huge upheaval, and each of us in our own businesses are trying to reinvent the way we work, to work out whether we can continue to work. And I think we're all very conscious that there are people who are not in a position to be able to deliver a service and now find themselves in unfortunate circumstances. Now, in our business, as a training business, we have 6-7 training centres around the country. We've got lots of classrooms. We've got lots of PCs, and we're now in a situation where it's very difficult, in fact, impossible, to get people into those classrooms. So we really have had to reinvent our business. Let me be honest with you, and I think you probably agree with this statement, that if we were all going to plan for the change that is now being forced on us, we'd probably be planning for 6 months, maybe a year, and then maybe take 6 months or a year to implement. I know that we certainly would. We turned DDLS into a virtual training business, pretty much last Thursday. We were 95% instructor-led. You can't do that unless you can get your teams working effectively. You can't do that unless you can get your people aligned, on board. And we want to share some of that best practice. I am very much the warm-up man. The real value from this will come with the security stuff from Jeremy and the collaboration and productivity that comes from Sue. But I just wanted to paint you that bigger picture. Frankly, the way we work, the way we interact, the way we socialize, all of those are up for negotiation. I'm going to be honest, I'm not a person who likes to stay in. I'm out. I like to eat in restaurants and socialize. When I found myself last Saturday night sat in front of the TV, I thought, what can I do? You know what I did? I learned how to add drop shadow. So I'm very proud of this. But if you check out the elephant in the classroom, there's a drop shadow. I've used that time productively because I'm not out on a Saturday night. I was also just in another meeting. Somebody on the meeting said, hey, you know what? We're heading towards the new normal. I don't know that I 100% agree with that, but certainly in the foreseeable short term to mid-term, there's going to have to be new ways to work. So Michelle, if I could invite you to move to the next slide, that would be fantastic. So I thought I'd start each of these little slides with a quote. This is a new beginning, a new year, and all things will change. Those of you who are perhaps under 30 will recognize that's a Taylor Swift quote, the great philosopher that is Taylor Swift. But we've got some fundamental questions to answer. How do we keep our business moving forward? And the answer to that, I think, falls into 3 very distinct categories. It comes down into people, it comes down into process, and it comes down into technology, and probably in that exact order. So let's just think about this. We're now having to reinvent our businesses. We've got changes to make to the way we interact with people, the way people work, with our processes, and with the technology, not just the technology that runs our business, but also the technology that we use to collaborate. Take a good hard look at the pictures I put on there. Have a quick game of spot the difference. This is a computer developer, a programmer, in the normal business in the bottom picture, and in isolation. The only difference being we're on a virtual session in the top one. Some people are very comfortable in working alone. That's their normal way of operating. In the brave new world, we're all going to have to get used to working away from our office, for working away from our colleagues and away from our peers. I saw a great comment come up on a social media platform. It said, hey, introverts of the world, go and check on your extrovert friends, because frankly, they won't be dealing with this very well. Understanding how to act and react with people is a key part of what we're going to talk about today and in some of the sessions that are coming up. But we'll tell you more about those a little bit later on. Now, I'm going to apologize in advance for the next slide, which is slightly busy, but it helps me tell the story. So I'm a certified change manager. In fact, I'm a change management practitioner, in fact. And one of the things you learn as a change manager is about things like the Kubler-Ross change curve. And you can see on here that there's a swing of emotions that we might go through when we have change forced upon us. From denial that the situation is changing, from frustration, even depression. And yeah, I'm certainly not a doctor and I wouldn't be qualified to comment, but we need to ensure that everybody across our business, that there's diversity, that we make absolutely certain that all people are taken along on this journey with us. If it was possible, I'd probably try and collapse this a little bit and try and make the denial and the frustration and the depression phases just that much quicker as we work towards that new normal. But as I started to kind of put the current situation on top of the change curve, I think there are some things that we all need to be really cognizant of. And I think probably the most important one, arguably, is probably security. You know, as we move to this world, we need to ensure that we can do so securely from a point of view of data, but also from our people and the way they work and the environment that they actually work in. And we'll cover that off in some additional slides. But there's also the huge people piece. And I don't mean just, hey, suddenly telling people, working from home. We have to take them on that journey. We have to help them understand that this is a brave new world. Now, I'm sat at home. I live in a place called Elkamos Beach in Western Australia. I'm sat next to my wife, Yvonne. She's been a payroll and HR professional for the last 30 years. She's never had to work from home before. And suddenly there are conflicting things she needs to think about, in terms of confidentiality of information, in terms of files, in terms of, technical support. Yesterday, she went on a webinar with PricewaterhouseCoopers. She didn't have any in-house support. How does she get it to work? She's got a whole new world that she's not used to, using collaborative tools like Teams or Slack. There's a huge piece there as well. But as I go through this, I also think about skills. And there's a great opportunity now to ensure that you've got those audited. Because you know what? It's much, much, much easier in a distributed workforce environment if you know who the person is who's good at writing copy. As we were pulling these slides together, who can do images for us, who can do copy for us, who can help us with this, who can we bounce that particular idea off. And as we've moved to a virtual training business, exactly the same rules have applied. Who can help us in terms of best practice for enrolling people, etc. So there's a good opportunity there to actually take a step in finding out who your experts are to make it easier to find the right person. And that also makes it easy when invariably we have to get people filling new roles. Our state manager in Sydney, there's no office there to manage anymore. She's now heavily involved in helping people and moderating people, attending virtual training events. Understanding her skill set and that she's the right person to do that was key to this. I'm also going to make another little recommendation and something that we're doing. If people do have more time in their day, if we're not all running a million miles an hour, which seems to be the case now, there is an opportunity to get people to capture some of the stuff that they actually do in-house. So for example, products like TechSmith, Camtasia allow you to create videos. So we got some of our guys creating little videos of how to do X, Y, and Z in CRM or AX, whatever it happens to be. So you need to think about this whole skilling picture. Who are your experts? Where are those experts? How can they help? And are there other things that they could be doing? And I very flippantly said, I wasted some of my Saturday night learning how to use Photoshop to manipulate that first image. I've also used it a little bit for learning. I've invested in my own skill set. But in all of this, you need process. Without process, chaos lies. And I would suggest to you a couple of things here. In fact, our most popular course in every geographical location since 2016 has been a course called ITIL. ITIL is all about service delivery. It's all about how you take a problem and you escalate it and you move that through the business. I mean, I'm cheapening the deal a little bit, but that is the case. We've also seen a change from waterfall project management methodologies to things like Agile. Now maybe is the time to look at what we implemented in yesterday's world and see what other bits of those industry standards we need to implement in the new normal that we seem to be working towards. I learned about huddles and stand-ups, but we don't need them. Well, actually today you probably do need a huddle. And I start every single day at 6 a.m. with a huddle with the leadership team of DDLS to actually talk about the implications from the previous day, the way the business is tracking. Maybe now is the day or the time we start to need to do stand-ups. We always thought we'd get around to doing them a little bit more agile. Maybe we need time boxes now to help us manage what we're actually doing. And there are experts in every business, whether that expert is you or somebody in the business that you work for. There's somebody that understands your project management approach, your approach to service management. I'm afraid there's way more that we need to think about. If you're an IT manager right now, you need to be thinking about your technology in-house. If you're a consumer of that technology inside the business, you need to be thinking about how you can access it from home. We use Dynamics, we use AX, we use a whole suite of products. We can only use that technology via accessing our systems via VPN. Who's managing that VPN? How secure is that VPN? Should we have any challenges and crises, how are we going to get in and reboot the router or do whatever it is we need to do? There's one thing that I've clearly seen, however, as a direct result of the current situation we find ourselves in. There is a huge shift in the direction of cloud. I quote these statistics a little bit later on, but there are, I think the number is something like 44 million active people on Microsoft Teams on a daily basis. It's phenomenal. We're moving workloads to the cloud. We're working with companies now to train their staff on Azure and AWS and even a little bit of Google Cloud as they're taking stuff out of the data center inside their own businesses and moving it to the cloud. Sort of the current situation that we find ourselves in. But we also, as we move down to the little camper van picture I found and put in the corner there, in the bottom corner, we need to think about the technology people have at home. And Jeremy will touch on this a little bit later on. Last night here at my home, the internet failed. It could not have happened at a worse time. I was trying to create some slides. I was chatting to our marketing director over IM. It just all went horribly wrong. I've got the skill set to start 4G on my mobile phone, and we connected through that, and we were able to continue, and I got back into Teams, and all was good. But if people can work from home, if they're working in a knowledge-based industry, so they need a computer or a PC, we have all of those considerations that people on this call are probably already aware of, like getting the children off Netflix or ensuring that the devices we've got can connect given corporate firewalls we may have. There's a whole heap of things in there. I was on a call this morning with a major technology vendor. An individual who works for that company is having to just basically step away from the business every other day just to be able to manage her children. In those situations, what kind of tools are we going to use to ensure that that individual can remain connected to things that she's working on rather than coming back to 5,000 emails? And again, we'll talk about that as we get into the kind of the meat and butter, if you like, of this presentation. Acceptance, collaboration, we'll spring back to that and move towards that when Sue does her piece a little bit later on. If you could move on, please, Michelle, that would be fabulous. So I'm very conscious of keeping to my allocated time, but I wanted to just say that, as this is how change happens, one gesture, one person, one moment at a time. That's from an author called William Dreyer, I think his name is. One of the things I wanted to get across is that we have a whole lot of tools at our disposal. I created that little image last night. There's Slack, there's GoToMeeting, there's Microsoft Teams, there's WebEx, there's Amazon Shine, there's Blue Jeans even, and Zoom. Those are simply tools. They are not the culture. They are not the ecosystem. They're not the huddles. They're not the stand-ups. They're not the way we share and collaborate on documents at the same time. You know what? 25 minutes ago, we were all working on this presentation at exactly the same time. We literally were working on the slides till 12:29. We were doing that together. We were using a collaborative platform. We were connecting and talking to each other as we did that. There are a number of things that we need to make sure we get right. We need to make sure we trust people who are part of this. We need to ensure we're managing by results and not presence. There's no point somebody being sat there with nothing to do, pressing the mouse so the green light comes on. Let's set those KPIs. Let's use the processes we talked about and ensure people know where they are and they know what they're doing. Within DDLS, we're very passionate about ensuring the technology is simply a tool and it supports our virtual workplace culture, but isn't our workplace culture. The culture is us. It's the people. We're communicating with each other. We're not, hey, let's do a team. We're saying, let's get Sue and Jeremy and Michael and Michelle, let's get them on a session. Let's go through and actually brainstorm this. But you've got to be realistic. You've got to let people develop their own styles. I've not blocked my background, and that's fine for this session. I'm talking quite fast because I've got a lot to do. When I'm collaborating on other sessions that the team are working on, I take a very different approach. Everybody is a leader in this world, and you have to let everybody develop their own leadership styles. Michelle. Changing the way we look at things and the things you look at change. I think that was Tolstoy who came up with that statement. We've got the tools. I mentioned the 44 million daily users. I can't find stats for Slack other than that current users are going up over and over and over and over. The reality is we're using these tools and we're having to find the best way, the best practice for us and for our organization. I put a little link in there. There are some free videos on Teams usage. They're very short. I describe them as just-in-time Teams training on video from Microsoft. I'd highly recommend you have a look at those, and then go and create your own, as we discussed a little bit earlier on. But there are other tools like Mentimeter and Envision. They give you capabilities like the ability to do pop quizzes and polls and interact beyond just conversation and just video. Envision is a great tool for whiteboards. You know, if we're using Teams or Slack or Zoom, not all of those products have got interactive whiteboards. We've got the ecosystem, we've got the technology, we're working towards the tools, the processes. We talked about Agile, we talked about ITIL. What I've just provided is the high level view. And what we need to start to drill into now is how we use some of this to promote collaboration, promote productivity, and make that secure. And we'll certainly do that over the next little while. And I just spotted a little question: can we get the slides? We absolutely and positively will make that available. I'd like to introduce Sue Webb, one of my team. She's an absolute superstar. She's got real content with real substance. Please enjoy her session.
Thanks, Gary. So my name's Sue Webb. I'm the Process Portfolio Manager for DDLS and also an instructor. I've just literally come out of the classroom where I was teaching a database querying course. I'm very passionate about collaboration and communication, and I also work with DDLS in terms of our own internal collaboration, communication, productivity. So this is sort of an area that's a bit quite passionate for me. So Michelle, I'll ask you to show the first slide. So this is looking at top 5 collaboration tips in this presentation. In a week's time, we're going to have the full session, which will be on collaboration. So we'll be able to dive a bit deeper into some of these and also have a look at some of the tools and the usage in some of those tools. But in this session, what we're going to be looking at is starting with setting the team up for success. So when we're talking about collaboration, we're talking, it could be people who work in a team or a group of people. So it's multiple people working together. So how can we set those teams up so that they're going to be successful? It's very important that we have the right tools. So we're going to talk very briefly about what types of software and hardware tools you might need, not neglecting processes. Processes are critical for this as well. Because as Gary mentioned, it's not just about having the right tool. The tool's not going to create your culture for you. Communication is one of the core factors of effective collaboration, and it becomes even more important with the remote workforce, with people working from home. We need to change the way we communicate and really focus on having effective communications and providing and asking for feedback, etc. It's also very important that within the teams that we know what is a healthy boundary between work and our other life, and that gets harder, of course, if you're working from home, if you're socially isolated, because both those things are happening in the same location. So we'll talk about that. We'll also talk about managing meetings to, you know, allow people to spend a little bit less time in front of the computer and perhaps a little bit more time, perhaps whether it's walking the dog or playing with the children or whatever it is. And of course, all of this is important that we're able to reward and recognize people that are doing good work. So looking at how we focus, so moving the focus from tasks to outcomes and achievements, rethinking the way we manage our KPIs, and of course, encouraging those that are effectively collaborating. So I'll ask you to go to the first slide, please, Michelle. So in terms of setting up the team for success, it's important that the team work together collaboratively to agree on what the strategy is going to be. So the team need to know what is expected of them from the leaders, and the leaders need to know what the team expects of them as well. We need all of that so that we can manage those expectations. So the strategy and approach to all of the aspects of work should be agreed upon up front with the team, and you need consensus on it so that you can get commitment to that strategy. So how will communications happen? Things like, what's a reasonable response time for emails and to return calls? You know, which instant messaging channel are we actually going to use? Which collaboration tools will be used? So I know in our environment, we use both Skype for Business and Teams. And within the product team, we've made a concerted effort to move the discussions that we have purely into Teams so that we can capture them and move away from Skype for Business. So that was an agreement on strategy that we came up with within our team. So it's very important that we have clear expectations that are focused on priorities, because work is going to be done differently. Your team members need to know what you and the business see as the most important thing so they can prioritize their own work. We've got to have an understanding around expected performance outcomes, any metrics that are being used, if we're working in projects, what the key milestones are, as well as the approach, our strategy to how we're going to update our status within the team. And of course, it's all about building trust. Trust is the two-way street between the team leader and the team members, and it's the most critical ingredient in having a successful working from home relationship. Reality is, if you've got workers who were performing well in the physical office, they'll tend to remain strong performers of the virtual one. Next slide, please, Michelle. None of this is possible without the right tools. So having the right both software and hardware tools. So you'll need some sort of collaboration and communication tools, whether that's Teams, whether that's Slack, Office 365, other environments. There's lots of other tools available. I did learn this morning that Microsoft have made, if you don't have Teams as part of your Office 365 subscription, Microsoft are making Teams available for 6 months for free because of COVID 2019. So don't think that, you know, you're going to have to spend lots of money to get that. You'll also need some kind of task management tool, and that could be something quite simple. It could be something more complex depending on your tasks, and some way of managing documents. Now, again, if you've got Office 365, that centralizes all of that. And I'll dive a bit deeper into some of those tools in the collaboration webinar, which is next week. Of course, you've got to have some way to access the software. So whether that's laptops or tablets, lots of organisations are discovering a challenge because their workforce have traditionally worked on desktop computers, which makes it much harder to work from home. So can they use other devices? Can you use a mobile phone? Can you use a tablet? Is there other ways to connect? What about your connectivity? Do you need a VPN? Jeremy will talk more about that as well. You need a comfortable headset. Trying to have virtual meetings when people have the microphone and the speakers enabled on the laptop, and you end up with feedback loops. So it's worth trying to find a comfortable headset, because you're going to have it on your head for quite a large part of your day. And you may need more than one monitor. Now, I know that that's a hard thing. That's a challenge to actually procure monitors in Australia at the moment. I think all of the retailers have run out of additional monitors, but if you've got them at work and can take them home, do what you need to do. But the best hardware and software can't make up for inappropriate missing processes. You still need processes, and they may need to be made more lean than they were previously. Take out some steps, perhaps take out some approval points and things like that. Next slide, please, Michelle. Most critical factor for effective collaboration is communication. So make sure that you're spending the time communicating clearly. Humans, we communicate, we pick up a lot of communication from non-verbal feedback. We don't get that when we're all working remotely. So make sure that you're taking the time to be clear, and that you're being both heard and understood by the people that you're communicating with. So don't bombard your team with messages either. Check in frequently, keep everyone on the same page, and have some fun. Feedback's really important. Keep it flowing freely in both directions. And especially for some of your team members, working from home could be brand new to them. It could be brand new to you, and everybody's going to want to know how they're performing. So ask the team for feedback on your performance as well. But it's very important that people are going to want to stay connected to the culture and values of an organisation. So keep those traditions going, even if it's in a virtual environment. Thanks, Michelle. It's also important to maintain healthy boundaries. Part of that is establishing norms. So you need to create new norms that establish clarity in how the team's going to function. So that should include things like your start and end times, your break times, your response times. You know, if you're using the status indicators like we use Teams, making sure that other people can see whether you're available. Other things like a norm, we have a business rule that if we're in a web conference, that we all have our cameras on. That's an important establishment that the team should agree on. We've also got to make sure that we're managing meetings. We often have unproductive meetings because they tend to follow Parkinson's law, which is that they're going to expand to fill all of the time scheduled. So instead of scheduling a 30-minute meeting, make it 22 minutes or 25 minutes. Instead of 1 hour, make it 48 or 50 minutes. And use video conferencing when available and when your bandwidth can cope with it. It is also very important that we maintain some kind of work-life balance. Remote workers will often find themselves working for long stretches without any breaks, and that's going to lead to stress and burnout. So your health is the most important. So make time for meals, make time for hydration, and remind yourself to mentally clock out at the end of the day. And if you're a team leader, make sure that your team are following that as well. So check in on them and make sure that they're doing that. Final slide, please, Michelle. And very importantly, it's about rewards, and it should be about outcomes and achievement, not about tasks. So we're not focusing on what employees have done each day. It's much more productive, engaging, and meaningful to focus on the outcomes and the achievements. So was the project finished on time? Was it produced to the same standard? This may need you to rethink your established KPIs. You might not be able to capture the data you need to measure them anymore. You might be working in environments where the infrastructure is unpredictable, so they might not be able to achieve response times. Let them settle into remote working life and then discuss together what the KPIs might need to be. And you may want to look at realigning some of your incentives to reward those who are both participating in and encouraging the growth of collaborative work. Rewarding those that gently nudge others to collaboration. So often the people who are encouraging others to be more collaborative are not the leaders themselves, but other team members. So encourage that, acknowledge it. I'll be back shortly to speak to you about productivity. I'm going to hand you over to my colleague, Jeremy Daly, who's going to talk to you about cybersecurity.
Thanks, Sue. For some fantastic tips there. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jeremy Daly. I'm the Cybersecurity Product Manager for DDLS. Michelle, could we have the first slide, please? So attackers are constantly looking for holes in a corporate's perimeter. And with everyone now starting to work from home, there's now thousands of tiny holes that attackers will be looking to utilise to their advantage. So we've put together some simple tips for people working from home on how to protect their network, as well as some guiding principles for companies to follow to help enable their workers during this period. And we will be doing a deep dive into some of these tips in our webinar in a couple of weeks. So let's move to the first tip. The next slide, please, Michelle. So tip 1 is spotting phishing scams. So as the world reacts to the current situation, scammers have found a window of opportunity. Global anxiety, panic buying, remote workforce, and general uncertainty all come together to form ideal conditions for online phishing and scams, which are adapting to Corona. Now, for those on the call that might wonder what a phishing scam is, it's where attackers pose as a trustworthy party to try and trick you into handing over personal details or account information. Phishing emails have been used by criminals for a number of years, but have become increasingly sophisticated since then. It used to be easy to recognise and ignore a phishing email because it was badly written. It contained heaps of spelling and grammatical errors. However, a lot of the current phishing messages that are appearing are starting to look a lot more genuine, and it can sometimes be difficult to distinguish these malicious messages from genuine communications. Now, launching cyber attacks focused on global news isn't anything new, so attackers are well prepared. Already in Australia, there's been many documented cases of scammers calling Australians who have had flights cancelled asking for refund details. Give me your bank account details. If you've purchased anything online recently, expect to see the usual Australia Post and Amazon scams start to ramp up again. Other scams might include emails where they're trying to imitate corporate language. So for example, you get an email from Human Resources telling you that you must read and acknowledge this new working from home policy in the next 24 hours, and you need to click on this embedded link. One cleverly worded email may be all it takes to breach into your company's network. So what should you look out for to help you spot a phishing email? Look, if it doesn't look quite right, check the from email address first. It might look correct at first glance, but it might be missing a letter. For example, an email coming from Human Resources. They might have left the U out of resources, but at a quick glance, it all looks normal. Always check the spelling. So while phishing emails are getting better, one of the most obvious giveaways in a phishing email is incorrect spelling in the body and in the subject as well. And does it contain a sense of urgency? You must action this in the next 24 hours or there will be consequences. Is that different to the usual communications you get? That's a big red flag right there. And always check the links in emails and to make sure they're real before you click on them. The easiest way to do this is to hover over the link with your mouse if you're on a desktop, or if you're on a mobile device, you can press and hold the link to view the URL. And be wary of attachments and never open anything unless you're 100% sure it's from a safe source. And if you think it's suspicious, then delete it and report it to your IT team. The next slide, please, Michelle. So our second tip is home Wi-Fi security. You need to make sure your home network is secure. So the first thing you need to do is make sure you have a password set up on your Wi-Fi network. Now, quick way to check if anyone else is using your network, switch off your router and see if the neighbors complain that their internet's gone out. But in all seriousness, make sure you have a password set up on the network and the security mode is set to either WPA2 or WPA3 if your router supports that. And choose a strong password. So ideally you want a password or a passphrase made up of 12 characters or more. Focus on making the passwords easy to remember but hard to guess, and don't use personal information like your pet's name. At the same time, be sensible about your password choice as well. So password 1234 is 12 characters, but it will also be cracked quickly. And never reuse a password that you use for Wi-Fi for anything else. Make sure your Wi-Fi name doesn't identify you. For example, Jeremy's Wi-Fi. That's just announcing that that's my network. Working from home is now an opportunity for attackers to breach the corporate network through your home network weaknesses. So don't make it easier by announcing who you are. Make your Wi-Fi name unique and change it up from the default name. There are known attacks on some of the default and common Wi-Fi names in the market. Some of you may have carrier supplied devices. So if we look at maybe a smart gateway from Telstra, it might have an ID of Telstra 87426AB. That's fine, because those random numbers will actually help prevent against that type of attack. Or you can have some fun and change it to something truly different, the Land Before Time, or an oldie but a goodie Skynet. It's up to you, but you don't want to be identifying yourself over that network. And you need to make sure your router is secure. So many routers have a default password that's easily guessable. Now, with people maybe going out and buying new routers while they're working from home, or starting to use their current one a lot more, you should be going in and actually changing this. And some routers actually famously keep their credentials as admin password for ease of use. Please change this to something more secure. And while you're in the back end of the router, make sure you update your firmware. It's important that you update the firmware because it keeps the security features of the router up to date. This can sometimes be set to automatically update on some routers, and on others you need to initiate the update. So to update your default password or the firmware, if you're not sure how to do it, have a look at the user manual. Or if you're stuck, I'd suggest reaching out to your IT support team and see if they can give you a hand. Give the next slide, please, Michelle. So third tip is using a VPN. So businesses will generally employ VPNs, or a virtual private network, for employees who are working remote from home to use when they need to access the corporate network. And if your organization provide ones, then you should definitely use it. Now, for those who might not be familiar with a VPN or what it does, virtual private network allows you to create a secure connection from your PC to another network over the internet, which in this case would be your corporate network. Now, while you're connected through the VPN, all of the network traffic is encrypted between your computer and the private network. So it keeps your data safe from anyone in between you and your destination, and will also allow you to access internal resources such as applications, files, CRM, other services which Gary mentioned earlier, that usually wouldn't be available to you outside of the network. Now, the benefit of using your VPN is once connected, you're actually protected by your corporate IT network's various security measures that are in place. So there is some level of security provided there. It's also highly recommended that you use your VPN, especially if you're using public Wi-Fi or in a communal working space, as all traffic from your device will go securely through the corporate servers. And if you are on a compromised network, any information that might be captured will be encrypted and useless to the person who's capturing that. Now, if you are on a compromised Wi-Fi network without VPN, an attacker can potentially capture any information that you're sending across that network. So if your business has supplied you with a VPN to use when you're working remotely or from home, I'd strongly encourage you to use it. The next slide, please, Michelle. Our fourth tip is compliance. So be aware that although it's easy to transfer data from your work environment to your home environment, it doesn't always mean that you should. There are regulations and laws such as GDPR, the Australia's Privacy Act, other global regulations that can actually make data protection a minefield if you're not familiar with it and what's actually considered a breach. There was an example a number of years back in the US where a contractor with the Department of Veteran Affairs took data home on his personal laptop which subsequently was stolen, the data that was on that laptop had the sensitive information of over 26 million veterans. So that's pretty serious. And if you do have a breach, your organisation can be liable. And make sure you adhere to your cybersecurity policy that's in place at your workplace. And if a workplace doesn't have one, it's going to need one. And it should cover things like password requirements, so how to store passwords correctly, why it's important to have unique passwords for different logins, outline email security measures, so only open emails with attachments from trusted contacts within the business or trusted businesses, delete and report suspicious looking emails. What's the appropriate use of social media and internet access? So an example of this is it appropriate for me to set up a Facebook account using my company email? Probably not. What's the appropriate business information that I can then be sharing on my social media channels? Have clear rules around company-owned equipment. So how to report theft or loss of a work device. And that's more important now than ever with everybody working remotely and out of the business who may be taking equipment home for the first time with them. How do you protect data that might be stored on devices like a USB stick? Or how do you enable restrictions on the use of removable devices to prevent malware being installed onto a system? And how are the IT departments going to actually roll out system patches and updates to all employee devices when they're working remotely? It needs to explain how to handle sensitive and confidential data, when and how staff may share sensitive data with others, and what is considered sensitive data. And prepare for an incident. Firstly, how do you respond? And then what actions do you need to take? And what are the staff roles and responsibilities for dealing with this? What is your breach notification policy? And lastly, this policy needs to be monitored for adoption and adherence to. The next slide, please, Michelle. And so our last tip is the Australian Signals Directorate Essential 8. Now, if you're responsible for your organisation's IT infrastructure, this is something you should be aware of. And if you're not familiar with ASD's Essential 8, then you should definitely check it out. Now, understand that no single risk mitigation strategy is guaranteed to prevent a cyber breach. However, the Essential 8 defines the 3 mitigation strategies to prevent malware and delivery and execution, to limit the extent of cybersecurity incidents, and to recover data and system availability. And it can be customised based on each organisation's risk profile and the threats they're most concerned about to provide a baseline level of protection. Now, due to time, I'm not going to go into these in detail. However, with many workers now working remotely and from home, I feel it's important to mention MFA or multi-factor authentication, which is one of the recommended baselines. So multi-factor authentication is an increasingly important tool for validating the identity of users, accessing everything from desktops to cloud-based resources, and its purpose is to make an attacker's life harder and reduce fraud risks. It's used to ensure that users are who they say they are, by requiring they provide at least 2 pieces of evidence to prove their identity. It's now, more than ever, it's now important to have this enabled as well if employees are connecting to any important or sensitive services. So remember I talked about using a corporate VPN a couple of tips ago. So let's pretend for a minute that an attacker has your credentials and they're trying to access your company's servers via your VPN. Now with MFA enabled on the VPN, it will prompt the user, or the attacker in this case, to supply a code which will be sent to a mobile number of that individual's credentials that they have with an SMS, so you can authenticate that it's really you. Without this authentication code to verify they are who they're claiming to be, they're not getting through. The flip side to this is that if you do receive an SMS with an authentication code, but you're not doing anything, you might be at lunch, you might be taking your walk outside to get some fresh air, this could also be a sign to contact your IT support team ASAP, as your credentials may have been compromised. And look, if this doesn't make a whole lot of sense to you, don't worry. It's something your IT department are all over and should be looking after. Now, one last thing before I hand back to my colleague. I know I'm a bit biased here, but I'm all for making sure organisations and individuals are continuing to upskill in security. And as Gary said earlier, our training's evolved, and we've been working closely with our vendors to ensure we can continue to deliver all of our cybersecurity courses. So if you want to complete your ethical hacker, you're looking to do your CISP or your CISM certification, you still can. I'd also like to invite you to join us for our cybersecurity webinar in mid-April, which will be hosted by 2 of our cybersecurity instructors and experts in their field for a deep dive into some of the topics we've discussed on how to stay secure when working from home. We'll be discussing a number of other topics as well, including social engineering, tips for faster Wi-Fi, and securing your network and physical surroundings. I'd like to hand back to Sue for a top 5 productivity tips. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Jeremy. Can I go to the next slide, please, Michelle? So in this tip, we're going to look at, again, 5 productivity tips. We're going to talk about the location of where you're working. So this is more to do with how you yourself are working remotely, whereas the collaboration was more to do with how you might work in a team. So this is about the individual. We'll talk about the importance of getting ready for work. We'll talk about making sure you've got a plan, a schedule that you can manage your tasks. Talk about individual communication and the importance of collaboration, as well as keeping yourself healthy. So I'll go to the first slide, please, Michelle. So the first thing you need to set up to be able to work from home effectively is your work location. So having a clear, defined work environment. So when you can, if it's possible, ideally you want to have a dedicated space. It might not be a whole room. It could be one corner of the desk. It could be a bench in the kitchen, wherever you can find yourself a spot that you can associate with your job, so that you know when you go into that environment that you're going to work, and then when you leave that environment and you're moving, you're going off the clock. So that means you do need to get off the couch, and you definitely need to get out of bed. The environment should be comfortable. You really don't want to be sitting at a dining table or on a dining chair if you can avoid it. If you've got the possibility of an adjustable chair, so you can adjust the height so that you're sitting at a good height ergonomically. You want a space that's well lit, that's comfortably heated or cooled, and is also well ventilated. So you're trying to build for yourself a focus-friendly area. And it's important that you're able to separate your work and home life. Now, I know a lot of people on this call, myself included, Gary, not particularly good at separating the work and home life. I think the work life tends to creep into the home life quite a bit, but it's much better for your mental health if you're able to separate them. So don't be tempted to take your work, so whether that's your laptop, your Bluetooth headset, into your leisure spaces. Try and maintain separate spaces so that you can mentally switch off from work when you remove yourself from that work environment. Next slide, please, Michelle. So the next thing we're going to talk about is actually getting ready for work. Now, it's really tempting to just roll out of bed and go straight to work in your pajamas. Nothing done, no breakfast, nothing, you're just going to go straight to work. But that's actually, again, it's not good for our mental health, and it's not good for us to actually get ready for work. So when you work in an office, the actual daily routine of getting ready and then commuting helps your brain get ready for the day. But when you're working remotely, you've taken away the commute. And often if we don't even get ready for work, if we just go to work in our pajamas, then we're not mentally ready to start work. So you may have some more time now. You should have some more time now if you don't have to commute. And for some of us, that's going to save several hours a day. So use that time to get a proper start to the day. Do some exercise, spend time with the family, spend time with the pets, take the dog for a walk, listen to a podcast, do some reading, whatever, but get ready for work. And get dressed. Have a shower. If you're a guy, have a shave occasionally, and get dressed appropriately. Decide amongst your team what actually is appropriate dress. You may no longer feel that as a team that business dress is no longer required. So maybe switch things up. If you had a casual Friday when you were going into the office, think about having a formal Friday, seeing as you're going to be working from home. It can be a lot of fun seeing people in ball gowns and black tie when they're working from home. Really, really important. We know it's the most important meal of the day, but don't forget breakfast. I'm guilty of this a lot. I jump on the computer because most of the people I work with are in the eastern states, so that we've got the 3-hour time difference. I want to get straight into work with them. And then I find myself, it's 9:30, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, and I haven't had breakfast yet. And you do really start to feel that lag. So make that part of your preparation for the day and getting ready for work. Next slide, please, Michelle. Have a plan for your day, have a plan for your week, have a plan for your month. Manage your own tasks. So when it comes to task management, we've got both personal and team tasks. And at the moment, there's a lot of changes and we need to manage those changes. It can become overwhelming if we're trying to keep track in our head of everything that needs to be done. And then you get another email and you're, oh my God, I've got to do that as well. Have a plan. whether that's post-it notes on a whiteboard, whether it's actual task management software, have somewhere where you know what work you need to do and you can see the work as it gets done. So have a to-do list and keep track of it. But what's very important about those tasks is that you are able to objectively prioritize them. There's lots of different prioritization techniques. I'll talk more about this in the productivity webinar in a few weeks' time. But there's things like tools like Moscow. So what has to be done, what must be done, what should be done, what could be done, what won't be done. Work out how you're doing your planning. There are other methods as well. Keep track of how much time you're spending on any one task, and don't go over the allotted time unless you've got some contingency tasks that you can let go of. Okay. Thanks, Michelle. Next slide. It's very important when we're working from home that we don't become too isolated. Now, I realise that's we're specifically socially isolating in the days of COVID. But we don't want to feel isolated. We might be physically isolated, but we shouldn't be socially isolated, and we shouldn't let ourselves get to a point where we're lonely. So communicating frequently is a way that we can stay in touch and feel like part of the team. So chat with your colleagues, chat on the phone, chat on video conferencing, use web-based chat tools. If you're using Teams, it's quite easy to start a chat with one of your colleagues. Have an area in your collaboration portal or whatever tools you're using where people can chat about non-work related stuff. So have a virtual water cooler space in your work environment, somewhere where people can share GIFs and jokes and photos and talk about, show the photo that the picture of the drawing their kid just did. One of my favorite things I'm seeing a lot on the moment is when people are working from home and they're referring to their pets as their colleagues and saying, my colleague just did this. So to share one of mine, my colleague, who's actually my cat Elroy, so if I was writing that, I'd say my colleague likes to follow me to the toilet. That's it's a fun way to break the ice, and it gets people engaged and lets people have a break from the realities of the world at the moment. Where possible, call people, reach out. We're humans. Hearing an actual human voice, or better yet, seeing another human face, can actually be really morale boosting. So don't rely too heavily on email and text-based communication tools. And final slide, please, Michelle. Very importantly, that you keep yourself healthy. So your personal health is the most important aspect of how productive you're going to be during remote work. If you spend all day at home sitting at a desk for weeks or months at a time, eventually your health is going to deteriorate. And that's really bad for your mental health as well. So stop and remind yourself, set a timer. There's lots of apps now that will give you a little gentle reminder of, a lot of the watch apps and things like that will give you a gentle reminder every 50 minutes or so to just stand up, move around, stretch your neck. Just get up and walk in place. If you don't have the ability to go for a walk outside, then just stand up and walk in place. Also, things like don't sit and stare at the screen. We spend more time in front of the computer when we're working remotely. And we have a tendency to stare at the screens, and then your blink rate slows down. And when your blink rate slows down, your eyeballs dry out. So every now and then, stop and just blink like mad. You feel a bit like an idiot, but it helps to lubricate your eyeballs. And be very mindful of the potential negative impact of social isolation on your mental health. We're social creatures. We need interactions with other humans, and that's all humans, introverts and extroverts alike. And we need some level of control. So if you're feeling isolated or lonely, use group chats, use video conferences, and make more frequent phone calls to other members of your team and people outside of your team to get the human connection that you need. Thanks, Michelle. So I believe we're handing back to Gary.
Yes, apologies. It was a 101 error on my part. I was too busy reading the comments and questions and forgot to press mute. Plus, Sue, I was busy putting my ball gown on because I've decided we should definitely do Formal Friday. So I've just been going through the wardrobe. There's well over 300 people have tuned into today's session. There's been some great comments. There's a question around VPNs that I can't answer. I'll maybe get Jeremy to have a quick look at that and respond, or at least point you at a trainer who could perhaps help in the next session. But we've been through a lot today, and really what we wanted to do is share some of the things that we've learned, that we teach every day in the classroom, and how we're applying that and adapting that for use in this current situation. We've looked with me at managing a remote workforce. I mean, there's no secret sauce there, so I just presented a whole selection of things to think about. Sue did a great piece on collaboration and communication. Importance of security, hopefully that resonated. There's a couple of good questions around security I saw that I think I was able to answer. You know, that is key. You know, I will share a story. I went to somebody's house recently before when we were allowed to go to people's houses. They worked for a major bank. And their rota password was set exactly the same. So, as in the default password and admin, and maintaining productivity was Sue. And I'm looking forward to the deeper session. Now, as I said, there are some deeper sessions. So, if I could invite you, Michelle, to move on to the next slide. We've got a numerous selection of ways that we can deliver here. We've spun our business, as I said on the elephant slide. I'll keep mentioning the elephant slide because it took me 2 hours and I love it. We've reinvented our business as a virtual business. We've always had a capability called DDLS Anywhere, connecting classrooms with high quality telepresence, and we're still leveraging some of that. Today, we are a virtual instructor-led training business, Australian-based trainers delivering across our own infrastructure, predominantly from their own homes, but also from some of our centres in some instances. We can ensure that whatever momentum that you guys are putting in place for projects you're working on, or for your recovery plans, or the new way of work, then potentially there are some skills in support of that. But I'm reluctant to turn this into any kind of a sales session, other than to say that DDLS is very much still open for business. And if you move on to the next slide, Michelle, which I think is the penultimate slide, I was just answering a couple of questions, and there's some commentary around, you know, the presenters working together and whatever. We didn't do a dry run for this. We literally joined the call 15 minutes before, and we'd all been working with the tools and collaborating in real time. So we didn't need to do that because we'd all been part of the process. And it was literally, you know, created from about Thursday last week. When we originally had the idea, our marketing director said, great, let's schedule this in 3 weeks. We haven't got 3 weeks. Let's really work together. Let's be collaborative. Let's make this reality. Let's make this happen. I really would like you to consider attending some of the other sessions. These are delivered by proper presenters in the whole. I mean, Sue is clearly a professional trainer, but we've got some of our cybersecurity expertise delivering some of these sessions as well. Part 2, effective collaboration and communication for a remote workforce, building on what we've just talked about. Part 3, some of our rock scientists, cybersecurity experts talking about security while working at home at a very different level than that which we've just been through. This was very much a sort of a helicopter view. Part 4, we'll be looking at managing a remote workforce. That's your next opportunity to hear from me. I've got no idea what visual metaphor will be included, but maybe more farm animals this time. James Davidson, our IT manager, and myself will go through sort of a mini interview, what we've learned, what we're doing, what works, and what might work in your environments. And finally, part 5, maintaining productivity whilst working from home, which again builds on the information that Sue's just given. We set aside an hour for this. We've got about 6 minutes, so clearly I should have done more elephant-related conversation. But I would just finally like to pass back to Michelle just to close the session out.
Thanks, Gary. I believe that's all we have time for, which brings us to the conclusion of today's session. I can see a few questions coming in, which we'll address after the webinar. If you have any other questions on today's webinar, please don't hesitate to give us a call or send us an email. Thank you for everyone for joining the webinar today, and thank you to our speakers, Gary, Sue, and Jeremy, for that great presentation.
And Michelle, can I just say we've had lots of questions for a recording, and we didn't press the record button because we didn't want to destroy the bandwidth for people from home. So maybe Team DDLS, I can invite you to join me in recording this offline and making a recording available. I think maybe that'd be a good idea. So we'll try and do it. So all the people who asked, and there's been several, we'll try and do that.
No worries. Thanks, Gary. Thank you, everyone, and I hope you all stay very safe.